Jai Hind everyone. Today we'll talk about 11th May, a date that holds a significance for India in the entire history. A date that brought back India on the map of geopolitics. A date that declared that a single decision in the Thar Desert would make India globally important, and the date that changed the perspective of the entire world towards the India. So, this is the date that changed the perception of global politics, and now India became globally relevant for every other country. So when we talk about the importance of 11th of May, this day we celebrate the National Technology Day. The day when we honor the excellence of Indians, the day we honor the scientific expertise of the Indians. But this date carries a much deeper meaning. This date is not just associated to the National Technology Day. Now, it was on 18th of May 1974, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi ji, India had conducted its first nuclear test at Pokhran, and that was codenamed Smiling Buddha. Now, it proved that India could, India's scientific capability to the entire world. Now, 24 years later, in 98, India conducted a series of 5 underground nuclear tests under Operation Shakti during the Prime Ministership of Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. Now, this was essentially a moment India stepped out of the nuclear ambiguity and declared itself as a nuclearized weapon state. So, this 11th of May symbolizes three powerful ideas: technological sovereignty, strategic importance, and India's confident entry into the global nuclear club. So, as we say, in 1974, India showed that we could do it. In 1998, we declared it that we have done it. Okay. So, when we talk about the pre 1998 reality, India was a nation that was under siege. Okay. In this 1962, we had recently recovered after a humiliating defeat in the Indo-China War. Okay. Now, this essentially was a situation which will tell us why 98 was so important. Why we must first understand the dangerous situation India had been through previous that date. Now, after this humiliating defeat of 1962 Indo-China War, India watched as China conducted its first nuclear test in 1964. It was then in 1971, during the Indo-Pak Bangladesh Liberation War, the US had sent its 7th fleet in the Bay of Bengal to pressurize India. Now, India knew how to create a deterrence. So, it was then that India was living under a world of nuclear apartheid. Only a handful nations were allowed to maintain nuclear weapons, and the other nations were expected to remain defenseless. Okay, so India had rightly refused to sign the discriminatory NPT, non-proliferation treaty. But the hard truth was very clear. Without credible deterrence, nobody will take us seriously. No nation, however large, would be treated as equal in the global politics. Okay, so it was in this situation this Operation Smiling Buddha came up. Okay, it was approved by the then Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi ji and was executed by the BARC scientists led by Dr. Raja Ramanna. Now, when we go through this situation, this again becomes a very challenging environment for the then Iron Lady Indira Gandhi ji, who took a very courageous decision, and she undertook everything under utmost secrecy, and it was then Dr. Raja Ramanna who prepared India's first nuclear device at Pokhran. Now, when the test had succeeded on 18th May 1974, Dr. Ramanna famously informed Indira Gandhi ji, the Buddha has finally smiled. India became the first non-permanent member to demonstrate nuclear capability, and it was officially called a peaceful nuclear explosion, and it was done to reduce international criticism. However, the world responded with sanctions on India, and this setback would later become the foundation of self-reliance in India. If we would not have been sanctioned, we would not have fought for our self-reliance. Okay. Now, then came the global shocks. Okay. The sanctions, heavy sanctions by USA, Canada, and other countries. NSG had strengthened itself. Okay. Moreover, the technology denial regime had imposed itself with its full force upon India. Clear? So it was then that the international community reacted very strongly. The US, Canada, several other countries, okay, they imposed restrictions. Technology transfers were now stopped, and NSG was strengthened just to isolate India. Now, India had used this situation, had turned this adversity into its strength. Those years of isolation forced Indian scientists, the top Indian leadership, to develop an indigenous technology across the nuclear missile, the defense sectors, and this isolation became the mother of all nuclear innovations, scientific innovations in the country. And now came the Vajpayee moment. Okay, it was a very bold decision taken by the then Prime Minister Vajpayee ji and led by the missile man Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam and Dr. R. Chidambaram. Now, it was in this situation extraordinary secrecy was maintained, and it was by 1998 that the security situation had become more difficult for us. As soon as Vajpayee ji came onto the office, he decided to take this bold decision. And this bold decision to change the history of independent India. Now, under the leadership of Dr. Kalam and Dr. Chidambaram, the Indian scientists and the Indian Army engineers, they carried out a masterclass. They worked throughout the day, they worked at night, they used camouflages, they disguised themselves, and they were able to successfully fool the Americans. Now, it was on the 11th of May, 3 nuclear devices were first detonated. 2 more were detonated on 13th of May, and Operation Shakti was now a success. So, this Pokhran 2 was not merely a nuclear test, it was one of the greatest strategic deception operation ever conducted in the Indian history. Despite knowing the heavy cost, Vajpayee ji showed his extraordinary will to go against the unwanted and unequal decisions. Okay. Now, when we talk about the international reaction and sanctions, US President Clinton said, we are going to come down like a ton of bricks upon India. The UN Security Council Resolution 1172 had been passed. Economic and military sanctions were imposed upon India. The global reactions were immediate and were very harsh. As declared by President Clinton, the UN Security passed its resolution 1172 condemning the test. And then they decided to impose fresh sanctions upon Indians. Now, once again, India had faced isolation. But this time, the nation was mentally as well as technologically better prepared to fight against this unwanted regime, the isolation imposed by this unwanted regime. Now, Pakistan again conducted the same. Clear? So, Pakistan conducted its nuclear test on 28th and 30th May, and now the entire South Asian region officially became nuclearized. India successfully established a credible deterrence. Now, after the Pakistani response, the South Asian region was bound to react when it became a officially nuclearized region. However, India was successfully able to establish a credible minimum deterrence. And India has now started restricting itself. Clear? Now, Vajpayee's diplomatic mastery came at this moment. He voluntarily declared to impose a moratorium on any further testing, any further test to be conducted in the Indian territory. Policy of credible minimum deterrence and no first use doctrine was also undersigned at this moment. And this was something that made Vajpayee's leadership remarkable. he was able to maintain a perfect balance of strength and the statesmanship. Now, India announced a voluntary moratorium on any further testing, and through the skillful diplomacy of Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji and his commander Jaswant Singh ji, India could gradually ease international pressure. Now, this patient approach eventually opened the door for Indians, and it was in 2008 the US India nuclear deal was signed, the NSG waiver came up, and 34 years of nuclear isolations were now finished. Okay. Now, it was in this situation complete nuclear triad, the Agni missile, Arihant submarines, and BrahMos, they were also completed. Okay, so from Pokhran to modern India, okay, we can understand one thing, that it had enhanced the strategic anatomy of India. Okay, the strategic autonomy of India. Okay, the real impact of Pokhran can be seen in today's India. Now we have this complete triad. Okay, we have the land, air, sea based delivery systems. Okay, secondly, including the Agni missiles, the Arihant nuclear submarines, and the advanced air launch systems like the BrahMos, this Pokhran gave us the strategic credibility to pursue our own independent foreign policy. Now, India strengthened its voice in global forums and enabled the growing role in the entire Indo-Pacific region. Okay. Now, without this decisive steps which were taken in 98, India's rise to a major global power would have been impossible, would have been very, very difficult. So finally, if we have to conclude one thing, the Pokhran explosion was more than a nuclear test, and it marked India's strategic awakening. Now, when we talk about this nuclear test, we understand why this nuclear test has a deeper meaning. Looking back onto this explosion might have shook the entire Rajasthan desert and the entire world. But it was not just a nuclear test. It was a test that was conducted to send a sounding message, okay, to India's awakening. Okay, in 1974, the Buddha had smiled. In 98, India stood tall and declared that from now on, we will write our own strategic destiny. This Pokhran test taught us a very, very timeless lesson. Okay, and whatever we had learned was through our bold political will that was combined with the scientific excellence and the nation's resolve that we will change our destiny ourselves. So this is the true legacy of 11th of May. Okay, and this true legacy of 11th of May makes us understand one thing, that it was the test in 1974 and the bold political decision on 11th May 98 that made India self-reliant in 2026. Clear? So this 11th May is not just the National Technological Day. Okay, this day does not commemorate only the scientific excellence of the leadership as well as the scientists, but it also declares India's strategic resolve, India's bold political decision making to not bow against any international pressure, against any unequal decision that is taken for the country by anybody else. Okay, so do comment and let me know that how much you understand that the significance of 11th May 1998 and 18th May 1974 have an influence, have an impact upon the India that has been existing today. So this was all from my side today. We'll see you all in the next session. Jai Hind.